If you've ever been in a long-term relationship, you've probably felt it. That incredible, all-consuming fire from the beginning, it kind of settles down into a comfortable, warm glow. And look, that's a natural part of love, but it definitely leaves a lot of us wondering, what happened to that spark? And maybe more importantly, can we get it back? Well, today we're digging into a study that asks that exact question. Can you actually intentionally turn your own desire back up? All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the problem itself, that dip in desire over time. Then we'll look at the specific study that went looking for a solution. We'll break down the 3 mental strategies they put to the test, go inside the actual experiment, reveal the one clear winner, and then we'll talk about what all this means for you. Okay, first things first. Let's just get this out of the way. If you've felt that passion fade over the years, you are not alone. It is not some sign that your relationship is broken. It is a nearly universal challenge that tons of couples face. In fact, the researchers behind this study point out that conflicts over sex and, you guessed it, diminished desire, are some of the biggest reasons couples end up in therapy. So this isn't some small thing. It's a major source of stress that people are actively trying to fix. And that leads us to the million-dollar question, right? We can't rewind the clock to that honeymoon phase, but can we use our own minds to consciously, on purpose, dial up our desire for the person we've built a life with? Well, to find an answer, we're diving into this really cool study from the University of Missouri-St. Louis. Researchers there decided, hey, let's stop just talking about the problem and let's actually test for a solution. And their goal was super specific. They wanted to know if simple strategies, things you can do entirely inside your own head, what they call intrapersonal strategies, could actually make a real, measurable difference in how much desire a person feels for their partner. So they set up an experiment to pit 3 different mental techniques against each other. You can think of it like a showdown, with 3 scientific contenders all competing to be the best desire booster. All right, contender number 1 is what's called positive reappraisal. This one is all about focusing on the good stuff. You deliberately think about your partner's best qualities, you replay your happiest memories together, you get the idea. And they weren't just asking for vague, happy thoughts. The study gave people really specific instructions. This is an actual prompt they used, designed to get people to focus on a concrete, positive memory. Now, contender number 2 is a bit of a curveball, reappraising the desire decline. The whole idea here is to just take the pressure off. By telling yourself, hey, it's totally normal for this to happen, you might reduce the anxiety you feel about it, which in a funny way could actually let that desire come back on its own. And our third and final contender is sexual imagery. This one is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's the most direct route, intentionally using your imagination to conjure up arousing sexual fantasies that specifically involve your partner. Okay, so we've got our 3 strategies. But how in the world did the scientists test them in a way they could actually measure? Let's take a look inside the lab. So here's how they did it. It was pretty simple, but really methodical. A person would read a prompt for one of the strategies for 5 seconds, then they'd see a photo of their own partner flash on the screen. They'd repeat that whole cycle 30 times. And then, and this is the important part, they would immediately write how much desire they were feeling right in that moment. They ran through this whole process for all 3 of the strategies. But, and this is crucial, they also had a control group where people just looked at the photos without trying any mental strategy. This gave them a baseline so they could see if the strategies were actually changing how people felt or if just seeing their partner's picture was doing all the work. But they didn't just ask people how they felt. They also hooked them up to an EEG to measure their brainwaves. They were looking for a very specific signal called the LPP. And the easiest way to think about the LPP is like an attention meter in your brain. It shows how much you're emotionally and motivationally engaged with what you're seeing. So the stage is set. We've got our 3 strategies, we're measuring feelings, we're measuring brainwaves. So which one actually worked? Well, the results were surprisingly, and I mean surprisingly, clear. After all that setup, all those prompts and pictures and brainwave caps, which strategy actually moved the needle on sexual desire? Okay, here's a look at the results from the study. After each round, people rated 4 different feelings. Now, 3 of them, infatuation, attachment, satisfaction, they didn't really change much. But that chart in the top left, sexual desire, well, that's where the story is. Just look at this. When people did nothing, their baseline desire rating was around a 72 out of 100. But after they used the sexual imagery strategy, that rating shot up to an 86. Meanwhile, the other two strategies, they pretty much did nothing at all. So let's be super clear about the main takeaway here. Sexual imagery was the only strategy that worked. It was the only one that caused a statistically significant jump in feelings of not just sexual desire, but also infatuation. You know, that giddy, can't get enough of you feeling from the early days. And that brings us to the final and maybe most interesting part. What does this all actually mean? Because the big takeaway here is really fascinating, and there's a pretty big twist hiding in the data. Remember that brain attention meter, that LPP signal we talked about? Well, here's the twist. The EEG data showed that none of the strategies, not even the super successful sexual imagery one, caused any real change in the brain's motivated attention to the partner's photo. And this is what's so wild, right? On one hand, people genuinely felt way more desire. Their personal experience was totally real. But on the other hand, their brain's automatic attention system, it didn't budge. This suggests something pretty profound. We can consciously create the feeling of desire, even if our brain's deeper, automatic response isn't really there. It is truly a case of mind over matter. But let's not forget how powerful that feeling was. A 14-point jump on a 100-point scale. That is a real, tangible effect. This wasn't just some tiny statistical blip. It was a meaningful boost in how people felt, created entirely by a short, simple mental exercise. So, what does this all boil down to for you? For years, therapists have suggested things like taking a 5-minute fantasy break to try and boost desire. Well, this study gives us the first real scientific evidence that it's not just talk. It actually works. It shows that you can make a conscious decision to generate feelings of desire, even if your brain's autopilot isn't on board. So the question really isn't, could a 5-minute fantasy be a tool for your relationship? The science suggests it might be one of the most direct and powerful tools you have.